The attacks on Tesla cars and dealerships could soon be defined as acts of terrorism. Also, meanwhile, there was some movement towards a Russia-Ukraine peace deal yet again after the U.S. and Ukraine worked out a 30-day ceasefire, but Russia this time has rejected the plan. And also in other news, there's been a lot of discussion about economic troubles in the United States and the aftershocks of Trump's tariffs, but a newly released economic data sheet is showing inflation is actually on its way out. It's dropping. I'll be talking about these topics and more today, so let's get started. First off, folks, the coordinated attacks being launched on Tesla are now being defined as terrorism. Now, this began with organized protests at Tesla dealerships. They looked grassroots. Allegedly, they were not funded and even paid for and even organized, allegedly, by a handful of far-left organizations now being called out. These expanded into dozens of locations across the United States, even individual attacks and harassment of Tesla drivers, and they also began escalating into threats of violence, people getting threatened, arson, people launching, Molotov cocktails, firebombing Tesla dealerships, and also a lot of other actions targeting Tesla because this is a form of retaliation against Elon Musk for, again, working with the Trump administration. They're trying to destroy his business as a form of retribution. Now, Elon Musk went public, and Elon Musk, he alleged the attacks were being coordinated. These are not random grassroots things, not just a crazy random person here and there doing it. He said a group of far-left organizations and major left-wing donors and figures are actually behind this. And now, interestingly, the Trump administration is saying the attacks represent a form of domestic terrorism, which could actually see criminal charges. Now, look, Elon Musk wrote publicly about this, and he alleged that 5 groups tied to Democrat funding platform Act Blue were involved in the protests and the attacks, which would not be too far-fetched given that many of these same organizations were the ones behind, the BLM riots, the Antifa protests, some of them at least, and also other very far-left grassroots operations that often did involve violence. Now, he said in the post, quote, "If you know anything about this, please post in the replies. Thanks, Elon." Now, Elon Musk, his claims were criticized by a lot of the big corporate media because he cited an investigation but did not link to it or show it. He didn't give really evidence on his claims. He didn't really detail what was behind him saying these very, very strong accusations, actually. Now, Forbes also alleged that Act Blue, the main organization he said was tied with this, they said that Act Blue does not fund the organizations that he said were tied to the protests. The argument from the conservative side is that, well, it's a chain of ties. If you go back to the organizations, funded by the organizations, you do find these intertwining ties. But again, now President Donald Trump has now officially weighed in, and during a press event right alongside Elon Musk, Trump publicly purchased a red Tesla and showed it off on camera, drove it around, talked about how much he loves Tesla. And during the event, when asked whether the attacks could be called domestic terrorism, Trump agreed. And he also said that he will take action, and he vowed to, quote, catch them. Watch.
Mr. President talks about some of the violence that's been going on around the country at dealerships. Some say they should be labeled domestic terrorists.
I will do that. I'll do it. I'm going to stop them. We catch anybody doing it because they're harming a great American company. I've stuck up for the NFL. I've stuck up for a lot of American companies and other companies, but American companies. Those people are going to go through a big problem when we catch them. And we have you got a lot of cameras up. We already know who some of them are. We're going to catch them. And they're bad guys. They're the same guys that screw around with our schools and universities, the same garbage. And no, we're going to catch them.
Now, in terms of who's behind the attacks and whether it be treated as a type of terrorism, we may get some answers soon. Trump said that it's the same people that, quote, screw around with our schools and universities, meaning, of course, these big protests we're seeing. We assume he's talking about that, or he's talking about the crazy gender policies. But now, look, the House DOJ Committee has also issued a letter calling for the Department of Justice and the FBI to investigate. Now, the letter is co-signed by 8 members of Congress, and it says this, quote, "These attacks, which seem to involve coordinated acts of vandalism, arson, and other acts of violence, seriously threaten public safety. Reports suggest that groups like Antifa, known for their history of domestic terrorism, including throughout the summer of 2020 following the death of George Floyd, may be involved in the recent Tesla attacks." Notably, a lot of this was in Seattle, where it's one of the hotbeds of Antifa. And they say this, quote, "I urge the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigations to prioritize a thorough investigation into these matters." Now, the letter goes on to cite reports, including from Elon Musk, alleging that several NGOs, non-governmental organizations affiliated with the Democrats, are behind the attacks, meaning this is a political operation involving major organizations, and this is coordinated. Now, it names several organizations, including Democratic Socialists of America, Rise and Resist, and a whole lot of others. And it also includes the allegations against Act Blue. They restate it. Now, there still doesn't seem to be any publicly available evidence tying the groups to the attacks, none that we've seen at least. But there is now an official call from Congress and the president to have this investigated. Now, in terms of whether the attacks could be defined as terrorism, this is another issue. Now, look, the technical definition of terrorism is important. Technically, terrorism is defined as using violence to achieve a political goal. Now, technically, if someone is using violence, arson, threats against people, doing this in a coordinated way, as a way to discourage the use of Tesla cars, but with the broader intent to harm somebody politically, sending a political message by attacking the supporters of a business tied in with a public individual, you could actually argue it is a form of terrorism. Again, violence with the intent to cause a political outcome. After all, that is what it is, right? It seems these attacks are meant to work as a type of intimidation. They want to make people not want to drive a Tesla or drive a Cybertruck because they might worry some crazy person is going to threaten them for it or vandalize their car. Maybe you have a kid. Would you want your kid in a car when you know your car is going to be targeted by people like this? Firebombing, vandalizing, drawing swastikas on the side of it, that's happening as well. Or if you're a dealership, somebody firebombing your dealership, would you want to risk that? That's the message being sent with these attacks. And if there are, in fact, major organizations behind it, that can mean they are coordinating on what are acts of terrorism in the United States. That is major. Now, look, the other side of this argument is that the protests, and even the violent protests, have been relatively tolerated when they come from the left, not from the right. We've seen groups like Antifa, right? This anti-fascist action, quote unquote, big quote unquote because they're kind of fascist, openly using violence and threats as a political tool. They've done this openly. Now, we've watched them target conservatives. If conservatives hold a demonstration or event, Antifa might come out and target them, physically attack them. And we've watched as Antifa goes to the homes of Americans and threaten people for their political views, including journalists. We've watched as they threaten violence, or even carry it out in many regards, in order to dissuade people from taking political stances that they don't approve of. If you have an unapproved political stance, you may be targeted by these organizations like Antifa. And behind these organizations are, in fact, a large networks of other organizations that fund them, tied in through a few different chains to these major organizations now being singled out yet again. In other words, it is coordinated, it is tied in with political movements, and for some reason, it's tolerated, at least legally, maybe until now. We watched Antifa not only face very little repercussion for this, but they even received what appeared to be political protection in some cases. In many cities where Antifa was carrying out these acts of violence or threats of violence, There were reports of even local politicians protecting them, even giving stand-down orders to police so they would not be prosecuted. Now, the actions of Antifa would technically fall under the definition of terrorism, using violence to achieve a political goal. So why was that allowed? Why was that tolerated? Why was that not prosecuted? Well, the bigger issue is that, since it was allowed for so long, it seems there's an expectation now that violence, threats, and attacks are somehow okay, at least when they come from the far left of politics. They've become used to this. They seem to believe they can do it without repercussion, and they've continued doing it. Trump's new message over the attacks on Tesla suggests those days just came to an end. Because if they label this as a terrorist movement, it means that every organization tied in with it could be charged by extension. This could become massive if they actually take action on it, but we don't know if they will or not. Now, look, of course, on the Tesla front, some are also assuming this is about business. If you read a lot of the corporate media, they're like, oh, Trump just wants to sell Teslas. And on this, Elon Musk has announced that Tesla is doubling the domestic production within the next couple of years. And he did talk about this during his meeting with Trump when they talked about the attacks on them as being terrorism. Now, this ties in with Trump's broader goal of reviving domestic manufacturing and bringing the auto industry home, back to the United States. And there's a big focus on that right now. This is the announcement which, Musk made at the Tesla event and saying he's going to do this. Watch.
As a function of the great policies of President Trump and his administration, and as an act of faith in America, Tesla is going to double vehicle output in the United States within the next 2 years.
That's
Double.
a big deal. That's great. Thank you. And by the way, he makes one car. This one I don't understand. This one I don't want, but that's okay. Without a steering wheel. It comes out next year, right?
Yes.
Explain that, please.
Yes. The Cybercab starts production in Texas next year, and it's self-driving. We have so much confidence in the self-driving nature of it that it'll actually not have a steering wheel. It will not have pedals. It'll either self-drive or not drive at all, but it'll self-drive. President Trump.
And I'm going to pass on that particular.
Elon Musk followed this up with a post on X stating, quote, "In support of the policies of President Donald Trump and to demonstrate a confidence in the future of the United States, Tesla commits to doubling vehicle production in the U.S. within 2 years." And he may be able to do it too because with domestic manufacturing, the return of it, the auto industry is going to become the big focus of this, reviving maybe Detroit, bringing back the auto industry. And Tesla, of course, is now a major American industry, a major American company for that. So we shall see. Now, look, in other news, there's been some movement on the Russia-Ukraine peace deal, but a solid deal is still up in the air. Let's go through what's been happening. First of all, we watched the potential Russia-Ukraine peace talks for the first time fall apart on live TV. That was during the recent meeting between Ukrainian President Zelensky, President Donald Trump, and Vice President J.D. Vance. After that big argument, Zelensky left the White House before his scheduled lunch with the president. There were reports he was kicked out. There were also reports saying he just left, but he did not get lunch. And he was also told he could come back when he's ready for peace. Well, now, not long after, it does look like he's ready for peace. A peace deal is in the works, although it'll likely start with a ceasefire. Ukraine has now accepted the deal. Now, this was announced by the State Department in a joint statement on the United States-Ukraine meeting in Jeddah. State Department said this, quote, "Representatives of both nations praised the bravery of the Ukrainian people in defense of their nation and agreed that now is the time to begin a process towards lasting peace. The Ukrainian delegation reiterated the Ukrainian people's strong gratitude to President Trump, the U.S. Congress, and the people of the United States for making possible meaningful progress towards peace." Remember, gratitude is the big key word here because that's what J.D. Vance accused them of not having. So they've been repeatedly expressing gratitude since then. It continues saying this, Ukraine expressed readiness to accept the U.S. proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties and which is subject to acceptance and concurrent implementation by the Russian Federation. Russia has to agree still. It says the United States will communicate to Russia that Russia reciprocity is the key to achieving peace. The United States will immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine. Trump cut that off after the meeting at the White House. They're now resuming it, meaning Ukraine now has some fighting capabilities yet again. Now it adds, quote, both delegations agreed to name their negotiating terms and immediately begin negotiations towards an enduring peace that provides for Ukraine's long-term security. On Ukraine's side, that was the big argument. Zelensky has said repeatedly, we need a long-term commitment or security. We need to make sure this is not some temporary peace deal. They need a long-term commitment to peace. It seems that's on the table now. It adds the United States committed to discussing these specific proposals with representatives from Russia. The Ukrainian delegation reiterated that European partners shall be involved in the peace process. And it says, lastly, both countries' presidents agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources to expand Ukraine's economy and guarantee Ukraine's long-term prosperity and security, suggesting that the rare earth mining operations in Ukraine will work as a type of long-term American interest that will work for security and also profit for Ukraine. Now look, after that, well, the ball went to Russia's court. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters in Jeddah that, quote, we'll take this offer now to the Russians and hope that they'll say yes. And leading up to this, President Donald Trump did his own thing. Trump put some additional pressure to push Russia to sign the deal. That included threats of large-scale sanctions if Russia does not take the agreement. He's threatening basically to decimate the Russian economy even further if they don't agree to this. But look, just as of this morning, a Russian negotiator rejected the proposed temporary ceasefire plan. Wall Street Journal said this: a Russian negotiator rejected a proposed ceasefire in Ukraine brokered by the U.S. As the Kremlin said, its forces were in the final stages of ousting Ukraine's army from Russia's cursed region. Yuri Ushakov, a senior aide to Russian President Vladimir Putin, said the 30-day ceasefire would allow Ukraine's forces time to regroup. They don't want the 30-day ceasefire because, Russia's taken some Ukrainian territory. Ukraine has taken a little bit of Russian territory. They're saying that they need to finish that before they talk peace. Now, Ushakov told Russian state television on Thursday, quote, this is nothing other than a temporary timeout for Ukrainian soldiers, nothing more. Our goal is a long-term, peaceful resolution. Steps that imitate peaceful actions are not needed, they said. And notes his comments were the first public response from Moscow to a U.S.-backed proposal agreed by Ukraine this week to pause the war. Now it's in its fourth year. It notes they came as President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, was headed to Moscow to discuss the ceasefire proposal, according to two U.S. officials. It notes that Ushakov said that he spoke on Wednesday with U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and had communicated Russia's stance. Now, news on this Russia-Ukraine ceasefire and peace deal is still developing. The important thing with all of this, I would say, is that recently we saw what happened when Zelensky rejected the deal. Zelensky was booted from the White House. He said, come back when you're ready for peace. And then the United States took actions to basically eliminate all of our support for Ukraine. We stopped providing them with intelligence, something they need to fight. We stopped providing them with some of the key resources that they need to keep the war going. And Ukraine very quickly realized that if America is not involved, they will lose. They have no ability to keep fighting. They secured a little bit of money from Europe, like a few $1 billion, when they need well over at least $100 billion to keep this thing on, on its wheels. They realized very quickly that they cannot keep fighting. And so they've come to the peace deal. Russia now is on the kind of hot plate with this, and Trump, of course, is putting some pressure on Russia. We will see what that is. But if Russia is now the one blocking it, we will have to wait and see, will Trump also put very heavy pressure on Russia? We could potentially see Trump come through with his promises of large-scale sanctions against Russia as a way of ending this. The challenge with that, though, is that the Chinese Communist Party is financially enabling Russia, meaning this is a proxy war, and Trump will have to hit China somehow in order to stop this. We shall see what he does. I'll keep you updated as more news comes through on this. Now, look, meanwhile, there's been a lot of discussions about the economic troubles in the United States. Many news outlets, they've been saying that Trump's tariffs war, it's risking destabilizing the economy. Now, there was the stock market drop that followed some of the recent tariffs, especially in the recent developments, let's say, between the United States and Canada. But now, well, it seems that inflation is actually going down. CNN reported this. Watch.
Finally, we have some good news on the economy and really the number one issue for many Americans, the cost of living. So we just learned that consumer prices in February increased by 2.8% year over year, 0.2% month over month. Both of these figures were a step in the right direction, and both were better than expected. So this is definitely very encouraging to see, because it's going to, I think, relieve some fears that inflation was perhaps re-accelerating, because this actually breaks a streak of 4 straight months where I think you could see it on the chart all the way to the right, where the inflation rate was going in the wrong direction, right? It was going higher and higher. Finally, we're seeing it dip.
Now, this is a good development. It means the United States economy is starting to recover. And this has been an ongoing issue. Remember, under the Biden administration, we were told, at least at first, we were entering stagflation. Who remembers that, right? Stagflation. That's the perfect storm of our money becoming worth less money, right? Inflation, while also having the prices for goods get even higher. So not only is our money worth less, but everything costs more. It's the worst situation you could be in. We were also told after that, suddenly, that there was no such thing. Everything was fine and dandy, and that there were no economic problems, and the higher costs of living, it was all in our heads. We were all delusional. There was no such thing, even though they had told us right before that there was such a thing. And then afterwards, it turns out that, well, everything was real, very real. It was not our imaginations, and the media lied to us. But it did not necessarily show up in the stock market. This is where the technicality was. Major companies were still actually doing decently well. And when people wanted to argue, there's no economic downturn right now, they would point to the stock market. Now, the issue with that is the stock market does not necessarily reflect the well-being of the average person. That reflects businesses getting business deals and maybe solidifying their monopolies, because remember, during COVID, a lot of mom and pop shops went out of business, and a lot of the big corporations that were deemed essential were able to dominate and put their competitors out of business. Of course their profits went up. So what happened was that, with inflation now reducing to about 2.8%, that means the average American, the normal person, could feel some relief. Meaning that, again, this is a difference between the big institutions and the experience of the normal American. And the normal American is making out a bit better now. But with that said, there are also some wild cards in this whole big picture, right? The big one being the trade war. And as the U.S. trade war with many countries is heating up, that's between the United States, Canada, China, maybe Mexico very soon. In April, we will see some of those actions take place. Well, the European Union is also now throwing its cards on the table. The European Union Commission is now putting 26 billion euros, that's about 28 billion US dollars worth of tariffs on US goods, including steel and aluminum. This is the press release from the European Union Commission on this move. They said, quote, "In response to the imposition of new, unjustified U.S. tariffs on EU steel and aluminum imports, the Commission has launched swift and proportionate countermeasures on U.S. imports into the EU." It says the Commission regrets the U.S. decision to impose such tariffs, considering them unjustified, disruptive to transatlantic trade, and harmful to businesses and consumers, often resulting in higher prices. It adds further in, quote, in response to new U.S. tariffs affecting more than 18 billion euros of EU exports, the Commission is putting forward a package of new countermeasures on U.S. exports. They will come into force by mid-April following consultations of the member states and stakeholders. And it says, in total, the EU countermeasures could therefore apply to U.S. goods exports worth up to $26 billion, matching the economic scope of the U.S. tariffs. They've put reciprocal tariffs in place against Trump's attempts at not even reciprocal tariffs, but some tariffs. Now, it should also be noted the tariffs from the European Union also to be more targeted at Republican states. This will not affect so much the Democrat states, and this, of course, has some political implications to it. They're punishing, intentionally or not, Republicans. And alongside the tariffs, there are also boycotts being enacted in Canada, in Europe, and other places to stop buying American goods. The Guardian said this: a growing international move to boycott the U.S. is spreading from Scandinavia to Canada to the UK and beyond as consumers turn against U.S. goods. Most prominent so far has been the rejection by European car buyers of the Tesla produced by Elon Musk. That sounds like terrorism to me. But it notes that now a prominent figure in Trump's administration is the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, a special group created by Trump that has contributed to the precipitous decline in Tesla's share prices because they're boycotting it politically. It notes about 15% of Tesla's value was wiped out on Monday alone. Further in, it states in Canada, where the American national anthem has been booed during hockey matches with U.S. teams, a slew of apps has emerged with names such as Buy Beaver, Maple Scan, and Is This Canadian, to allow shoppers to scan QR barcodes and reject U.S. produce from alcohol to pizza toppings. I would assume Canada is preparing for its return of its economy to being maple syrup and beaver pelts. Further, it states in Sweden, more than 70,000 users have joined a Facebook group calling for a boycott of U.S. companies. It says, ironically, including Facebook itself, because Facebook is the U.S. economy, which they're organizing on, which features alternatives to U.S. consumer products. And they said this, quote, I'll replace as many American goods as I can, and if many do so, it will clearly affect the supply in stores, wrote one member of the group. Now, it goes on to note similar boycotts happening in other countries as well, including Denmark, which again owns Greenland, which may become part of America if Trump gets his way. Now, on that front, Denmark, they may be losing control of Greenland at the very least, because during the recent elections they just had in Greenland, the party that wants independence from Denmark, they just won, and another party very close to that, but also wants actually to become part of the United States, had about an equal share of votes. It's about 30% independence, 30% independence and being part of the U.S., and only about 30% against both of those, meaning the majority of the country is at least leaning towards independence. But, back to what's happening right now with all these economic battles. Now, on the other side of the picture, it looks like Trump's retaliations against the retaliations, because that's where we are now. Trump put tariffs in place. Other countries are retaliating against the tariffs. Trump says he will retaliate against the retaliations. And we now see the first effects of the retaliations against the retaliations. Canada already is backing off its surcharge on energy to 3 U.S. states. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, he was the guy who launched the surcharge, saying he could shut down the electricity in various states, including New York. He announced on X he is now bringing the extra charge to an end. It only lasted a couple days. Now, he said this, quote, please see a joint statement from United States Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick and myself. Quote, today, United States Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick and Premier of Ontario Doug Ford had a productive conversation about the economic relationship between the United States and Canada. He said Secretary Lutnick agreed to officially meet with Premier Ford in Washington on Thursday, March 13th, alongside the United States Trade Representative to discuss a renewed USMCA. USMCA was the deal that replaced NAFTA. That was the Trump negotiated trade deal with Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. And they said it's ahead of the April 2nd reciprocal tariff deadline. And they say in response, Ontario agreed to suspend its 25% surcharge on exports of electricity to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. Now, that post came the same day that Trump's retaliatory tariffs took effect on Canadian steel and aluminum. And also as Trump was saying that he would issue a national emergency on energy to make sure that we no longer need to import energy from Canada. He threatened to basically destroy their energy industry to the U.S., to destroy even their automotive industry. He said permanently destroy it because we still buy stuff from them, and to also replace the other things we get from Canada, including, for example, oil and timber. Now, Trump said this as well, right? Let me show you what he goes into. It looks like this whole brewing battle is far from over. Trump is laying out his plans. He's saying the United States is going to take back what has been taken by other countries.
April 2nd is going to be a very big day for the United States of America. The United States of America is going to take back a lot of what was stolen from it by other countries and by, frankly, incompetent U.S. leadership, grossly incompetent. I gave you an example of Ireland. I would have never let that happen. Impossible for that to have happened. But we're going to take back our wealth, and we're going to take back a lot of the companies that left are coming back. If you haven't read.
Now, as I've been mentioning, I personally believe Donald Trump's goal is this. It is to bring back American manufacturing and also, when it comes to jobs that left the country. Now, under a lot of the different arguments, people say, well, all of our jobs went to China. That's partially true, but a lot of them actually went to Canada and Mexico because of the NAFTA trade agreement. We lost a lot of our factories to NAFTA. And any type of trade agreement does not really bring those back. They have not achieved that. Donald Trump and what he's doing with the tariffs is saying, come manufacture in the U.S., you won't pay tariffs. And so keeping them in place is forcing the businesses to bring them back. The businesses that left the United States because of NAFTA. Now, with the trade war also, though, it seems there's a broader plan here. It's now being suggested part of that plan is to replace taxes with tariffs. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick discussed this with CBS publicly. Watch this.
How could you ask me, while we're running a $2 trillion deficit, and not care? You're destroying the people who have run this country before, are destroying the future for my children and my children's children. I can't have a 50, 75. We have a $36 trillion deficit. And we used to run deficits of $400 billion. Now $2 trillion, everybody's like, who cares? I tell you what, who cares? Donald Trump cares. And when we balance the budget, you know what that means? That means our deficits stop. Interest rates come smashing down. His goal is to have external revenue. The way I think about it, we all are so used to paying taxes. We're so used to it. We have like Stockholm syndrome. Don't stop the Internal Revenue Service, God forbid. How about this? The rest of the world leans on our economy, breathes off our economy. Not only is our economy $29 trillion GDP, but we consume $20 trillion a year. We are the buyer of everybody's stuff. We buy everybody's stuff. So who's more important? The people who sell stuff or the people who buy stuff? So we are the buyer of everybody's commodities, products, goods and services. Everything comes from us, right? Let them pay a membership fee. We all understand that model. Let them pay. How about we, you and I, and every single person we know pay less? How about no tax on tips? How about no tax on overtime? How about no Social Security? How about all those things? These are the kind of thoughts that will change America. I know what his goal is. No tax for anybody who makes less than $150,000 a year. That's his goal.
Now imagine that. No income tax, and also the elimination of most of the other random taxes we pay, like tax on tips or the tax for dying, the death tax. Imagine all of that coming to an end, and also imagine what that would mean for the buying power of the United States. Because look, if we don't pay as much taxes, that means we got more money, which means that we're already one of the biggest buyers in the world. That's one of the big draws of the Americans. We're some of the biggest buyers on earth. We buy a lot of stuff. Imagine if we had even more money for even more buying power, and imagine what that means for people wanting to sell to us, and also with tariffs meaning even more money. Now it seems that's a big part of the goal here, and I want to be a believer, folks. Now look, on another topic, with the turmoil now erupting in Syria, there's some actually really serious stuff going on. There are emerging reports that Christians are being targeted for persecution, and not enough people are talking about this. A lot of legacy news outlets are being accused of effectively turning a blind eye and even making basically like excuses for the guy leading what could be a genocide. I'll be talking more about this after I come back from a 1-minute break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. There is what's a possible genocide of Christians starting yet again in the Middle East, and not enough people are talking about it. Now look, with the turmoil now erupting in Syria, reports are emerging that Christians are being targeted. And some legacy news outlets, they're basically being accused of turning a blind eye and even making excuses for the people launching this, covering it up. The Christian Post said this: over the weekend, many watched in horror as reports poured out of Syria detailing the slaughter of Christians and other religious minorities under the new Islamist regime led by Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, now masquerading under his birth name, Ahmed al-Shara. And it's reports from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, SOHR, confirm that since early March, over 1,000 civilians, many of them Christians and Alawites, have been butchered in revenge killings and massacres, particularly in coastal regions like Lataki and Jabala. Women and children have not been spared. They are killing women and children. It says entire families have been wiped out by HTS forces and their jihadist allies. Now, the author of this piece in the Christian Post said, you'd think this carnage would dominate headlines, but the mainstream media, CNN, BBC, the New York Times, barely whispers about it. And it says when they do, it's to parrot al-Jilani's promises of moderation, or to downplay the sectarian slaughter as clashes between security forces, all those children's security forces apparently, and the, quote, Assad loyalists, because there were reports that Assad, the former leader, was protecting some of the Christian groups. How do you define this, right? Now it says the United Nations, ever the apologists for tyrants, has been complicit too. And remember, the Chinese Communist Party somehow is on the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations. How did that ever happen? Now, folks, as I said, I'll keep you updated on all this stuff as we go forward. Hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. All right, folks. And by the way, a lot of stuff happening. I should mention, too, the The white farmers in South Africa, Trump is also now offering them a path to come to the United States. You have a communist group there saying kill the Boers, and they have a song about it, killing white people, killing these white farmers. And again, communist organizations behind the killings. There were recent events in South Africa where they had white crosses all along the road representing all the people who were murdered by these communists. You have the freaking New York Times making excuses for mass murder. You have the New York Times, just sickening publication, making excuses for this, saying that's not what they mean. They don't really mean killing people. Yeah, they are. And Trump now is offering these people a way to come to the United States to escape that violence. So a lot of stuff going on with this, folks. All right, question here. James Hayes, you're saying in a free market, everyone has a choice to purchase something or not. That is the American way of capitalism. Yeah, you're talking about, of course, the terror attacks, as Trump is calling them, on Tesla. You know, and this is the line here. It's fine to boycott something. If you want to boycott something, go ahead. You can politically boycott something. You know, I think a lot of people, they don't want to watch movies with certain actors anymore if those actors have said something on politics that annoyed them. I would argue a lot of Hollywood films, I think they used to get boycotted. Now people just don't watch them because they're just tired of all the stupid politics. You know, you have that. When Biden was president, or the auto pen was president, during his administration, you had it, for example, that there were the protests against Budweiser. You had the protests against Target because they had this trans, clothing lines with tuck features or something like that. Those were protests, right? But you didn't have people firebombing Target or, I don't know, like burning down their local liquor stores because they were mad about it. You didn't have that happening. There's a fine line between choosing to buy something or not buy something when it aligns or does not align with your values versus threatening people, attacking people, acting out in physical violence, firebombing things. When you cross that line, that's when you're crossing the line into terrorism. Because what you're effectively doing is you are creating fear, using fear as a weapon to force people to adopt your political views. That is by definition terrorism. And it is true that, the American way of capitalism is the free market, but threats of violence are also a disruption to that, which is why, again, they're illegal, right? Now, look, folks, if the Trump administration actually moves forward and does, in fact, investigate this as terrorism, the real irony is that we've lived under things like this basically since the Obama administration. Obama's second term in office, that was when he started all these things with race politics and gender politics. You started having the mass protests, Black Lives Matter, BLM. Antifa started coming out. You started having a far left element that used violence, rioting, burning down businesses, killing people. When they conquered part of Seattle and declared a Chaz or Chop site, technically that was an actual insurrection. If you conquer part of America and then declare you've created an autonomous zone, which is what Chaz site was, the autonomous zone, that's an insurrection by definition. You could be hanged for that if they actually applied the law. And they never did that. They just let it happen. And so, at least since the Obama administration, we've been living under terrorism that has been relatively tolerated. And the message now being sent is that, well, terrorism is terrorism, no matter who's behind it. The problem you have is the people behind it are effectively a lot of the grassroots of the Democrats. And I'm not trying to be partisan here. I'm just saying that's the truth of it. The grassroots. Unfortunately, the grassroots is the very far left. Now, you could argue there's been a breaking of the main Democrat Party from that faction. Ironically, the whole Palestinian protest thing was kind of a breaking point for the Democrat Party. When Biden was president, you had it, for example, that a lot of those very radical organizations funding a lot of the student protests. Even remember, they were even protesting some of the fundraisers for the Biden campaign. Remember that? They were even protesting events where Obama was speaking. They kind of broke away, but those organizations are the agitprop branch of the kind of grassroots of the far left. Agitprop being agitation propaganda. They want to rile people up. It's a communist concept. And so the physical violence, the mass protests, the guys with the bullhorns, it looks like it's grassroots. It's not. It's actually very heavily organized. And it's also very heavily funded by a very small handful of, kind of a large group of organizations that are known. This was not mysterious. They do this, and they've done it legally. Even though technically it violates the law, they've done this with legal protection since the Obama administration. We've been living under this for well over a decade. And, we'll see what Trump does. We'll see if they actually move forward to prosecute the individuals or maybe groups or even fund money behind this, because they technically could. And the designation of terrorism could be used as the tool to achieve that, because technically, again, this would be defined as terrorism, to use violence as a way to achieve a political outcome. Michael Kolovovsky, you're saying domestic terrorism gives Trump a big hammer. Yeah, and the other side of it too is you will have the Democrats crying foul about this, because you could say the tables are kind of turned now. Remember, when Biden was president, he was saying that the MAGA Republicans were domestic extremists. He was saying that if parents went and protested at their school boards, and there were allegations, some of them were threatening violence, although there were never police reports filed. They just went straight to the FBI and said they were being threatened with violence. There were no reports to back up those claims, so we don't know if there's any foundation to that. But they were accusing Republicans of being terrorists. When you had people, for example, right, the J6 protests were the big one, and there were some people who were violent. It was not the majority of the crowd. Most of you have probably seen my features and documentaries on that, showing you all what happened. There were some people who were violent, but it was by no means the majority of people. They used that to frame basically the entire MAGA movement as being a terrorist movement, and they were looking into Trump supporters in that light. Now, the tables are turning. The big question is going to be, can the Trump administration go after those groups as terrorists without basically looking like they're doing the same thing Biden did, right? Because remember when Biden was giving his speeches about the MAGA extremists and the threat to the soul of democracy, it was kind of the same thing. Although you could argue that Trump supporters weren't like firebombing schools and stuff like that, right? Denise B., you're saying, if China is threatening reciprocal measures to MO's court settlement, e.g., of potentially seizing Chinese assets in the U.S. Are you talking about Missouri? Before I go further with this, so basically what happened is that Missouri, the Attorney General, they sued the Chinese Communist Party for, I believe it was $26 billion, and they won because the CCP never showed up to court. And this was because of the CCP's actions to corner the market on, protective equipment ahead of COVID, when they were lying to the world about, hey, everything's under control, folks. Meanwhile, they were exporting the virus. They restricted travel in China, allowed travel outside of China, and while they did that, they took actions to seize all of the protective equipment so that they would have the monopoly on it so they could suffocate the rest of the world. They did that. And they just got sued in Missouri for it, and Missouri won. Now, the CCP will probably not pay Missouri, but the Attorney General in Missouri is saying that they can seize the assets of China to pay it back. That includes farmland, that includes other things owned by Chinese state-run businesses. And remember, the big ironic part with Chinese businesses is most of them are state-run. If they're above a very small threshold, they're state-run. And that basically means most of the businesses big enough to do things on U.S. soil would have state-run ties, meaning they can seize a lot of stuff. But the question here, Denise B., continued, if I were a U.S. business operating in China, I think it might be prudent to leave ASAP and disable what can't be removed. Yeah, so there's going to be a trade war with the United States and China. We're already seeing a bit of it, but this is going to become a lot bigger. And let me explain this. I'm kind of watching the writing on the wall here. Trump right now is not going too hard on China. When he put 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada over fentanyl and human trafficking, he only put 10% initially on China, then another 10%. Technically, they got a better deal on it. Now, the other argument is, well, he has a lot of other trade restrictions on China that hit other things, and so if you take it as a full picture, we probably have more tariffs on them than Mexico and Canada. The issue is China, the Chinese Communist Party, runs most of the drug trade. They supply the fentanyl, and they say, no, we don't. They literally subsidize it. If you're a company in China selling fentanyl, you get government money in China. The CCP subsidizes it. They are directly involved. It's not even like they tolerate a thing. They are directly involved. Mao Zedong started the operations with the drug trade, by the way. I mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again. Great book on that, Red Cocaine by Joseph Douglas. This was an intentional form of unconventional war against the United States. They established the drug trade by going through Fidel Castro in Cuba and then created drug networks which basically corrupted the governments all throughout Latin America. The CCP did that. And it also gave Cuba a lot of political and military control in a lot of countries, including, for example, Brazil, and an organization between Cuba and Brazil called the Foro ao Sao Paulo, the Forum of Sao Paulo, basically enabled Cuba and the very far left factions in Brazil to effectively create policies and create the quote-unquote pink wave through all of Latin America. That was the far left takeover of most of those countries, which really decimated their economies. A lot of history. Maybe we'll go more into it in a future episode or something, but there's a lot of history to this. The CCP is the main force behind it, though. And so the question is, well, why did Trump put such high tariffs on Mexico and Canada when the CCP is supplying the drugs, supplying the precursors, supplying the security in some areas, controlling the ports for the shipments, and doing the money laundering? Why is that? Well, I don't know. You tell me. With the current tariffs on Canada, for example, I'll give you just another example of this. China is undermining the tariffs. China is saying, well, look, America wants to put tariffs on your aluminum and steel. China will buy it. And so they're kind of making a pressure release valve to undermine the U.S. actions. The CCP does this in other regards with sanctions. If America puts sanctions on Russia, if America puts sanctions on Iran, if America puts sanctions on North Korea, if we put sanctions on Venezuela, what happens? The CCP swoops in and undermines the sanctions, basically meaning the political change that would have been reinforced by the sanctions is no longer achieved. They instead are forced to join an alternate world order being led by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, we see this as the CCP is using this as the way to undermine the peace deals that Trump is trying to negotiate with Russia. We can expect Russia and China to become key parts in this. And if Trump wants peace with Russia, he has to go through China. If Trump tries to basically settle this whole deal with Canada now, China's undermining it. China can maintain a trade war between Canada and the U.S. by making, again, that pressure release valve going to their economy unless the U.S. focuses on China. And I could go on the list with this. A lot of actions Trump is trying to achieve are being undermined by the Chinese Communist Party. And so if he wants to achieve what he's trying to do, he has to go after the CCP, plain and simple, because they're the ones preventing him from succeeding. They're the ones actively, behind the scenes, undermining his actions. And look, he's only been in office a bit over a month now. He's only been in office a bit over a month. Now, my two views on this is either this is going to become a blank spot, Trump's not even going to notice the CCP is basically undermining everything he's trying to achieve, or he's going to go with a trade war with China. And if he does that, we can decimate their economy. We can. The CCP, because of the way they've kind of gone about things, I've said before and I'll say it again, their power is not internal, their power is external. Their power comes from foreign investment, big investment firms putting your pensions into the Chinese economy, like BlackRock and so on, putting your pensions, your retirement, into the Chinese economy, including for a lot of states. Is that smart? Why were they doing that? Businesses, again, basically we've been propping them up. And if Trump really wants to do something, he can. As can a lot of the world, actually. Now, to be fair for Canada as well, I should say, they have also put tariffs on China. So Canada, to an extent, is also, they're not just running to China. They do have a trade war with China as well. In fact, China also put a lot of tariffs on them. So I want to paint this accurately. As has Mexico and even Europe with this whole trade war. Some countries in Europe have also been pretty strong against China. A lot of them have not. Italy basically is, right under the thumb of the CCP. Italy has gone very heavily for the CCP, as have, Belarus, as have the UK is teetering sometimes. It depends on which politician it is. The CCP is trying to build a huge embassy right now in the UK, and there's a lot of the the pro-freedom for Hong Kong groups, because remember Hong Kong used to be UK territory. There's a lot of that going on. In other words, it's not all black and white, but China will become the main focus of a lot of this trade war because they're the ones undermining most of Trump's actions on that front. So get ready for it, folks. And I do believe I do believe Trump's aware of it, especially because of some of the people he has in his cabinet. Marco Rubio, for example, the CCP sanctioned Marco Rubio. When they want to make deals with the U.S. State Department, they have to tell Marco Rubio, come and talk with us. We promise we won't arrest you. What a wonderful promise. Thank you. He's the Secretary of State now. What a dumb move of the CCP. Another question, Ashley from California. You're saying, have we heard anything about the gold in Fort Knox? What gold? I'm joking. No, we haven't heard anything. The latest we've heard on the gold in Fort Knox is that Elon Musk is saying they want to investigate it. There are calls for this. We have not yet seen any actual developments on that. Elon Musk, in some public interviews, I believe he talked about it on Joe Rogan, he was saying, look, if there's gold at Fort Knox, you should make a spectacle of it. You should have tours. You should let the American people go on a Disneyland tour at Fort Knox to go look at the big stacks and pyramids of gold. I'd go. I'd want to see, hey, this is American wealth. This is American prosperity. Come and look at it. Why don't they do that? Maybe send us a picture. Just, look, you don't have to bring us in there for the security risk. Have a guy go in there with his smartphone and take a picture of the golden pyramids, because we assume they stack them, and just show it to us. It's not that hard, right? It's not that hard. And they're like, no, we can't do that. Why is that? There's no solid logical excuse on why they can't even send us a picture of the gold. At least Photoshop something, guys. Come on, right? give us a break here. And the argument from Elon Musk is he's like, look, we're going to go in there and it's going to be like, y'all remember that movie Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey, where they get this money. I don't want to spoil the movie if you haven't seen it, but they get this money. All right, spoiler alert. They get the money and they blow all the money because they want to bring it back to this girl that one of the guys likes. And they replace all the money with IOUs. And so they're like, it's just as good as money. IOU, like a free cheeseburger or something. That's like $5. That's like a golden strip. $5, folks, for a cheeseburger. Cheeseburgers are going up in value too. They're kind of expensive these days. They used to cost like $1. Now they're like $10. Right? That is real appreciation. you want to talk about like a good investment. And so people are arguing you might go to Fort Knox and just find a big stack of IOUs at this point. We don't know. On that point, though, there have been other countries sending gold to the U.S. I don't know if I haven't shown it to y'all, but the UK, for example, they've been sending some gold bars to the U.S. There's some different arguments on why that's happening. But anyways, I don't know why they're not showing us the gold at Fort Knox. Trump, Musk, they do want to have that investigated. We've not heard anything on it. Flying Squirrel, you're saying, America is the locomotive of the world economy, not communist China. Yeah, the CCP has basically been the locomotive of destroying a lot of manufacturing in other countries. And you know, this was the kind of the terrible irony of what we've watched. The belief in the United States was basically, hey, if we do business with China, they'll become less communist. And I think that was partly due to a very basic and not fully accurate understanding of what communism is. Unfortunately, a lot of people only understand communism as as an economic argument. That it's about redistribution of wealth and basically centralization. Everything is under the government, and there's no free market. You know, that is the extent to which a lot of people understand communism. That's part of it. I don't want to go into a long thing on this, but technically the reason we debate communism on that front is because even prior to the rise of Karl Marx, communism existed, right, mid-1800s. Communism existed, but it was effectively losing the debate. And it was losing, but prior to that, it was regarded more as almost like a religious argument. Communism, they had the communist church, and they were really bizarre. They talked about the transformation of God into Satan and crazy things like that. I'm not even joking. You can read that in the book History of Austrian Economics, Volume 2, by the way. They were really weird. They were more of a religion. The alternative proposal to Karl Marx was the actual communist church. And they had communist hymns and communist saints and communist everything to replace the Catholic Church with communism. It was more of a religion. But the debate basically ended on sociology, called praxeology at that time, and on economics, because the argument was that it's not practical. Communism in practice would never work. At the time of, for example, Ludwig von Mises, if you want to read some of this history, his book Socialism talks about this. It's a great book, by the way. It's very thick, but it's a great book on this. They talk about this. He actually even has a whole section on communist ideology at its core being dialectical materialism, which is an ideology of struggle. The argument was basically communism is not practical. It would never work in practice because of sociology and economics. One of the reasons Karl Marx became popular is because he argued that you no longer have to debate people on practical grounds. He said the economists and the sociologists, at the time they called praxeology, he said they are the bourgeois intelligentsia, and you don't have to debate with them. And he said if you want to know what he said you can't make an argument over whether communism will work because you got to try it first. You got to pass it to find out what's in it, right? You got to pass it to find out what's in it. Basically the big communist argument. Now what Karl Marx basically did through that is made it so that communists no longer debated on the economic front. But unfortunately for a lot of the free world, the understanding of communism became limited to the social element and the economic element, and they forgot about the entire creepy religious element, which was, I'm not joking, it was satanic. It was rooted in Abendgensianism and Rosicrucianism, things like that, right? And a lot of other Gnostic sects. We totally forgot about that. And so when America went to make this big deal with the Chinese Communist Party and give them the free market, the understanding was based on a very narrow understanding of what communism is. get them in the free market and communism will die, because they only understood communism through economics. What happened? Well, communism did not die. The CCP is still very much in power, and they've effectively been able to prosper because we gave them business. And they used that to undermine the freedom and values of the rest of the world. Rather than make China more free, they made the entire world less free. And, you know, it is true, as Flying Squirrel says, America is a locomotive of the world economy, not China, not the Chinese Communist Party. I believe it is true that we can take that back very easily. We just have to do it. And I do believe that if we remove the CCP's ability to be bloodsuckers, to survive, to be parasites, to feed off of capitalism, it will collapse. It will collapse, because there's nothing else holding it up right now. VW Birdhead, you're saying Christians have been terribly persecuted for a very long time under the radar. I wonder how mainstream media will tell this story. Yeah, it is unfortunate. Actually, I talk a lot about human rights in China. You know, Christians are persecuted there as well. You know, you could debate how it is, because there are approved, this is where people get confused. There are approved versions of Christianity in China. You can practice Christianity or Catholicism without being killed or having your church destroyed, or at least you could have before. It's changing a bit right now. And, you know, the CCP would tolerate it. But if you did that, you had to follow the altered version of Christianity, rewritten literally by the CCP. I mentioned before the CCP rewrote the Bible. They also make it so if you're a Catholic, you can only follow the CCP appoints the bishops, I believe it is. There used to be alternate bishops, which the Catholic Church recognized. In my opinion, very unfortunately, the Catholic Church has since begun recognizing the CCP appointed ones as a way to try to make Catholicism less persecuted in China. But I would argue that by doing so, it's not a real religion in China. You're basically worshiping the CCP. I don't think you should alter a religion for the sake of not being persecuted, in my opinion. I think it is one of the ways religion is damaged. I believe that, you know, and this is one thing you see over history. People start criticizing religion because religion will say certain behaviors are bad that people want to engage in, right? Communism being one of them, right? You know, communists used to be excommunicated by the Catholic Church. And so as a way of making the religion more acceptable, sometimes religious leaders will alter their religion, saying, well, we used to say you couldn't do this, but you can do it now, in order to make it more popular. And the belief of that is, hey, make the door a little wider, let more people in, and at least they believe in something, right? That's been the argument for a lot of these things. But I would undermine that by doing that, you end up damaging the religion. You make the religion no longer represent what it should. And you know, case in point in China, they have state-approved versions of the religion that have pulled out what, you know, kind of the essence of what the religion was. They paint Jesus as kind of a bad figure. They rewrote the Bible. They rewrote some of the stories of Jesus, and it's terrible. I've even heard from pastors saying that if you have like the 10 Commandments hanging on your wall, the CCP will tell you can't have them because, you know, you're not allowed to believe there's a power higher than the Chinese Communist Party. Now, is that responsible to the religion? No. And so what you have in China is you have what's called house Christians, people who do not follow the altered version of the religion from the CCP. The house Christians are persecuted. I mentioned, you know, the persecution of Falun Gong, where the CCP uses them as living sources of organ transplants, tortures them, slave labor, re-education through labor. The CCP does the same thing to Muslim Uyghurs. They do the same thing to Tibetan Buddhists. They do the same thing to the house Christians. Now, not on as large of a scale, at least not until recently, but they do it. Now, on that point, the CCP has recently been ramping up its persecution of all religions, including Christianity, and they even brag about it. And unfortunately, this does not get a lot of news coverage. Now, the argument some people will make is that, well, the house Christians, people try to say they're not like normal Christians. I can't remember the names of them. There's like one called like something Thunder and stuff like that. Look, realistically, there are a lot of denominations of Christianity. You have in the United States, you have Baptists and Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Protestants. And then with Catholics, you have the Catholic Church and you have the Anglican Church, and you have a lot of branches of Christianity, and they don't all agree with each other. In China, you also have very unique denominations, which Christians here would probably be like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. But they're different denominations. And those are the ones being persecuted. And so, personally, I don't think that's a reason to allow people to be persecuted, personally. You could argue, if in America, imagine the government wanted to persecute, Jehovah's Witnesses all of a sudden. Do you think Baptists would support that? I know a lot of Baptists might not agree with Jehovah's Witnesses, but would that be acceptable? I don't think so. So why is it accepted when the CCP persecutes different denominations, right? I believe people should defend other religions when they are persecuted, even if you don't agree with them. The nature of freedom of belief is the protection of beliefs that may be different from yours. But if you allow religion to be persecuted, it can be yours next. And that's why the Founding Fathers, I believe, put that in place. And I believe the United States should stand up for that. And again, they're not really doing it. They're doing it a bit, but not nearly enough, I think. So, we'll see if that changes. But yeah, persecution of Christians is getting worse in China, too. And it's also getting worse in a lot of other countries. I mentioned Syria. Some people would say even the persecution of the Boers in South Africa. A lot of them are Christian, although it's not specifically against their religion. It's not targeting them just for their religion. You have a lot of persecutions that are kind of swept under the rug. And I personally believe if America is going to become the shining city on the hill, we talk a lot about economics, the trade wars, the tariffs, and everything else. But America is more than just money. And I believe that if America is going to restore itself and again become kind of the shining city on the hill, we need to represent values. We need to represent standards. And I believe the standards, at the very least, are the First Amendment, the protection on religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech. I believe at the very least, that's what we should represent. It might be a hard bet to make Europe, adopt the Second Amendment, you know what I mean? But at the very least, the First Amendment. And I would hope that America will begin more strongly defending freedom of speech and freedom of belief in every corner on the earth, and that if a country violates that, we should take strong measures against them. At the very least, universally condemn them for it. Anyways, that's my opinion, folks. Thank you so much for being here. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. It's already Thursday, can you believe it? Please share this video, give us a like, and folks, I will see you tomorrow. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.